All right. So yeah, just to recap, in the previous lecture, we looked at an overview of what thermal physics is and how it is connected to modern physics and how it played a very pivotal role in the formulation of quantum mechanics. And we'll discuss that in great detail later. And then we moved on to core thermodynamics with the first most important concept being that of temperature. So how do we define temperature, the notion of thermal equilibrium, and how do we measure temperature? These are the things that we discussed last time. So we'll continue on the same vein this time. Hello.
Yes, sir. You uploaded some lecture slides on the Teams.
Correct.
There are many contents other than that you said. So do we need to refer that also, just the content that you explain in the class?
So the slides are from last year, and you refer mainly to what I teach in the lecture, because what I teach in the lecture is what will be uh, asked in exams and other things. Those other material can be for additional reading, but we will base it everything on what I teach in the lectures. Is that okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. And eventually I uploaded the future lectures also. So you can take a look at them before coming to the class so that you have an idea of what is going to be taught and we can have a nice discussion that way. And yeah, so we will come to all those concepts. It's not like all the things that I uploaded are based on the first lecture. No, those are for the first 7, 8 lectures. All right. So we constructed a thermometer last time, which was a hypothetical scenario where we had a metal wire and we mapped a change in temperature to the change in the length of that metal wire. Now, physical phenomena like this, and this particular phenomenon is called the expansion of substances or materials when you heat them. We use such phenomena to measure temperature. We also discussed other phenomena like the melting of ice and the boiling of water. These are phenomena that happen under atmospheric conditions in a particular geographic location. They always happen more or less at the same temperature. They of course depend on certain factors such as humidity and all these things, but minor changes. So these are physical phenomena form the basis for defining what a temperature scale is. So we use these what are called phase transitions. We'll discuss briefly about phase transitions later in the lecture today, but phase transitions help you calibrate thermometers. Okay, because these transitions happen at very well defined temperatures. Okay, so this is the way you construct and calibrate thermometers. So let us now look at the other phenomenon that we talked about. So we had the length L of a wire, and this is at say temperature T naught or say Ti. And when you heat this wire to a temperature of say Tf, then the length becomes not just L naught, but some plus some delta L. Okay, let us call it Li, the initial length, and this is delta L, the change in the length. And we mapped this delta L to Tf minus Ti. This quantity we can call delta T. So this delta L was mapped to delta T, and that is how we constructed the thermometer. Now this is a very general phenomenon, and there are different kinds of thermal expansions of materials. There is something called a linear expansion, and second there is an area expansion, and then there is a volume expansion. Okay. Now all these three are only convenient classifications that we have come up with. In reality, in nature, every material has volume. So what we are really looking at is different ramifications of only one thing, which is volume expansion. Okay. Then why do we need these other descriptions like linear expansion, area expansion, etc.? We'll think about that in a minute. But the simplest in this particular case, just a minute, I'm getting a phone call. Yeah. So the simplest scenario is what I just discussed, which is if you have a wire of length L and it changes by delta L. And this is called linear expansion. Okay. And how do we then model this linear expansion? It is very simple. Whenever you have some quantity, here the length, which is a function of time, temperature, and we are changing the temperature from T to T plus delta T. If delta T is much less than T, that is if it's a very tiny relative change in the temperature, right? You can do a Taylor expansion of this quantity, right? All of you, do you know what Taylor expansion is? Can somebody just say yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So you can write L of T plus delta T for very small delta T will be approximately L of T plus delta L by delta T evaluated at T. Let's call it T naught. Okay, just to be clear. Evaluated at T naught times delta T, plus you will have the higher order terms, square plus order of delta T cubed and so on. Which we cannot, for small delta T, we can ignore all this. And what we get now is L of T naught plus delta T is equal to, this is for delta T tending to 0. This should be remembered because last year we had a student who took the linear approximation and said that the length exponentially increases as a function of temperature. So that is obviously not correct. So as delta T tends to 0, we can drop these other terms, and what we have now is L of T naught plus delta L by delta T evaluated at T naught times delta T. Now, this can be written as L plus delta L, where L is L of T naught plus delta L. This is L of T naught plus delta L by delta T at T naught times delta T. Okay, so delta L will be proportional to delta T always as long as this delta T is small. Okay, this is the very basis for the simple model that we have for thermal expansion. For small changes in temperature, we neglect the higher order terms, and what we get is a simple proportionality of the change in the length to the change in the temperature. Okay, but usually the way we write this is delta L equal to Li, which is the initial temperature, times alpha times delta T, where alpha is now called the coefficient of linear expansion of that particular material, of the material. Okay. So why do we write this in this form? The general expression the reason I introduced it through this general expression is because this delta L by delta T need not be a constant in general. In general, it is not a constant. But in theory, it can vary with temperature, but in practice, you will find that this is largely a constant over a wide range of temperatures. Say, for example, you take a metal wire and this delta L by delta T is independent of temperature over, let us say, a 50-degree variation. Then you can use such a wire for measure as a thermometer in that range when this is more or less constant. Okay, so for such materials, you can write this in this form where alpha is a constant. But in general, delta I can be written as the initial length L of I times alpha of T naught, alpha of T, which will be a function of time in general, times delta T. Okay, so this is just to be kept in mind, even though we will not encounter any such situations, but it's important to keep in mind. Think of it this way. If you take a wire and you start heating it, at some point, the length will not increase much more. Up to a point it will increase, but it can't increase indefinitely, right? There will be other forces at play, and at some point the wire will break. Instead of actually increasing in length, the wire will break. At that point, this whole linear theory of expansion that we have from this lowest order model will no longer work. So there are limitations on how far you can extend this very simple model. But for all practical purposes, this is extremely useful, and this has been used for centuries and probably even millennia to study thermal phenomena. Okay.
So
Now this, yeah.
you
Say.
said that this is used in practice, but our approximation is for very small delta T. Then
Correct.
what is the amount of this very small?
Yeah, very good question. So for example, let us say this is used very often in bridges and civil constructions where the summer temperatures, for example, you construct a bridge, right? A bridge is usually not a single piece of concrete, right? You have two or more pieces which are usually placed next to each other. If we don't leave any gap in between them in the summers, so in the winters, this temperature can be say minus 30 degrees Celsius in a place like the US that I mentioned last time. In the summer, the temperature in the same place, say for Washington DC, temperatures can go from minus 30 in winter to plus 40 in summer. This entire range falls in the linear expansion regime. That is why it is so practical. The entire 70-degree range, which is a huge range of temperature for humans.
But so then how the Taylor expansion can be valid at such a large range?
The Taylor expansion is valid as long as the coefficients are small, right? It doesn't have to be only delta T, which is small. The other coefficients are even extremely small.
Okay, so
that is how the Taylor expansion gets, you can truncate it at first order. That's a very good question, because it is not just the smallness of delta t. It is the smallness of the coefficients also which allows you to ignore the changes to higher orders. Yeah, so this is
Sir,
the, yeah, go on.
sir, for making such bridges, we have to account for the we have to find materials which will accommodate the coefficient of linear expansion at the variation of the temperature. Also, we have to take in mind, we have to keep in mind the strength of the bridge, that it is not compromised uh, while taking in account the thermal expansion.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Yes, exactly. Exactly. That is why civil engineering and structural engineering have a lot of inputs from materials. You always keep hearing about different kinds of steel that they use, and different kinds of uh, construction techniques. All these are to make they have to take into account all these factors. Otherwise, they cannot. The bridge won't survive. I'll give you another more physicsy example. In my lab, for example, I use a cryostat. The cryostat has the lowest temperature of the cryostat is 5 millikelvin. Okay, which is 0.005 Kelvin, which is essentially minus 273 point. You can now tell how it's in the third decimal place. It is that close to zero. Okay, and the upper portion of the cryostat is at 300 Kelvin. And I have a cable that goes from here to a temperature of 4 Kelvin. So between 300 Kelvin and 4 Kelvin, there is literally one cable. Now, one end of that is at 300 Kelvin, the other end is at 4 Kelvin. We will of course look at that case shortly, but the kind of mechanical stress that this cable will be under is immense, right? Because it's not uniformly heated. One end is at 300 Kelvin, the other end is very close to zero. So the gradient of these temperature difference will cause a lot of stress in the cable. So you use special materials. So a particular material that people have, an alloy that people have found out, is copper beryllium. So you infuse some beryllium into the copper, and that gives it the mechanical strength to withstand such huge temperature gradients. Another such alloy is copper nickel. So special materials are used when a lot of when thermal expansion and other things have to be. So these materials have very little thermal expansion. They don't expand much at all, and that maintains the structural integrity of the cable. All right.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, in this cryostat, how is such a lower temperature achieved, like
We'll
0.0?
I will come to that later. I will definitely come to that later, because that is one of the most fascinating aspects of it's pure thermodynamics. We'll come to all this later.
Okay,
All
sir.
right. Okay. So now we have looked at linear expansion. Area expansion is basically linear expansion in two directions. If you heat a sheet of metal, it expands in both directions, and that is what we call area expansion. And volume expansion is if you take a cube instead of a sheet, then the cube expands in all, this is the Z direction, this is the X direction, and this is the Y direction. It expands in all three directions. All right. So now consider sorry. The reason why I said that in reality there is only volume expansion is because consider a wire. Okay, and you heat it. Let's say you heat it uniformly. Now, every substance that you handle in real life is not perfectly an infinitely thin straight line. So this should have an area as well as a volume. So expansion happens in all directions. But we are only interested in this direction. If we are only interested in this direction of expansion and ignore the other two directions, we call it linear expansion. There are particular cases like the wire, the change in the length of the wire, etc. that I talked about. For example, inside a thermometer, okay, you have this, mercury is filled here, and then you have a thin channel with gradations, and the mercury, rises say up to a certain level within this channel. It's a very good approximation of a linear expansion. In fact, it is the volume of the mercury that is increasing, right? But what we have done is we have chosen the material of the glass in such a way that within the range of body temperature fluctuations, this glass hardly expands. And since this mercury is flowing inside a channel which doesn't change, the area and basically only the Z direction is possible for the mercury to expand in. The X and Y directions are constrained because of this channel. And that is how we achieve an approximate linear expansion in this particular scenario. And we then use that to measure temperature. So in reality, there is only volume expansion. Linear expansion is a convenient approximation under certain conditions where we restrict the expansion along the other two directions or we ignore it altogether. Is that clear to everyone? Now, for the volume expansion, we can write a very similar formula. So delta V will be the initial volume times beta times delta T. Okay, and this beta is now the coefficient of volume expansion. And this coefficient is pretty close to 3 times alpha. Okay, and this is very simple to see because let us say L is consider a cube of side L, right? Now the volume is related to L as L cubed, right? If you notice the way I defined this, the reason I put this VI here and the Li here is because we are actually looking at this. Beta gives you the relative change for a given change in the temperature. It gives you the fractional change in the volume of the material, right? So now if I have to, so let us say I change the temperature by delta T, then L changes. Delta L by L will be alpha times delta T, right? According to the formula. And delta V by V will be beta times delta T, according to this formula. Anybody who has done a little bit of error analysis will immediately know that if you have a function which is L cubed, you take the relative error. The way you do this is simple. You take the logarithm of this expression, say log V is 3 log L, and you differentiate it. This side with respect to V and this side with respect to L. So you get delta V by V is 3 times delta L by L, right? I'm not taking the derivative. I'm actually computing the differential. Okay. So it's the differential of this logarithm will be delta V by V, and this is 3 delta L by L. Is this step clear to everyone? I just want to make sure that the mathematics is clear.
Yes, sir, it is clear.
Okay, so then you just plug this in, you get beta delta T will be 3 times alpha delta T for the same change in the temperature. So therefore 3 times alpha is beta. This 3 factor comes from this L being cubed. So now we can do a very similar analysis. So we can easily say that if you consider area delta A to be some A times some say gamma times delta T, then this gamma will be 2 times alpha. Sorry. Gamma will be 2 times alpha by the same prescription. Okay. So that is about thermal expansion. Now let us we looked at this in the context of this linear expansion can happen in the context of a solid, as in a metal wire, also in the context of a liquid. For example, mercury inside a glass column, that is also linear expansion in the approximate sense that I mentioned. But we know that there are primarily, let us look at three phases of matter that we are interested in. There are, of course, different phases of matter that people have discovered and considered other states as new phases of matter. But for our purposes, at the very basic level, in the most common sense, we have solids, we have liquids, and we have gases. So this solid and liquid have a very well defined notion of volume. Solids also have a notion of shape, but liquids don't have a notion of shape. The idea of a volume is there for both in a very well defined fashion. Liquids take the shape of the container that you put them in, but otherwise there is a definite volume for the liquid. And the liquids that we are considering are also mostly incompressible liquids. I'm pretty sure you studied basic fluid dynamics in your 12th, and incompressibility means that the density of the liquid is more or less the same. You don't change the density, meaning it cannot be changed. It's a constant. All right. So liquids and solids have these properties, but for a gas is a compressible fluid, meaning you can change the density of the gas by large amounts. You can, for example, the LPG cylinders that you have, right? In your kitchens, everyone has an LPG cylinder. It is filled with liquid petroleum gas, right? It's liquefied and the liquid is filled into the cylinder, and the cylinder is held at a pressure because of the evaporated gas on top of the liquid. So largely the contents of the cylinder are in liquid form, and above the liquid there is some gas. Now as the gas is extracted, more and more liquid turns into gas, and that is how the pressure is maintained. Okay. So gases don't have a very well defined volume. The volume is basically that of the container, right? So we need to now look at gases specifically, because gases, you can't really define anything called a linear expansion for a gas. So in the case of gases, you only have a volume expansion. Okay. All right. So that too, it is not, it's called different, but we will come to that later. Let us now look at, so what we are looking at right now is what changes happen to substances when you heat them. The length changes, the size, the dimensions change, that is called expansion. But there is also a change from one phase to another phase. And the classic example is that of water. Okay. So when you heat water, what happens when you heat water? Let us take a block of ice and we start heating it. Sorry. Yeah. Let us take a block of ice and let us say we start heating it. First, it turns into water and okay. So this is temperature. Let us say we have ice initially. Initially we have ice until 0 degrees Celsius. Let us say we start from -20. Until we reach 0 degrees Celsius, you pretty much have ice. And at 0, something happens, and from 0 to 100, you have, this is ice and this is water, and above 100, you have steam, which is water vapor. Okay. So at this point, at 0 degrees, what is the state in which this substance exists? I mean, is it ice or is it water? This point is called a phase transition. Okay. And particularly it is called the melting point or the freezing point. Okay. So these are the terms used for this point, 0 degrees. It's the melting point of ice or the freezing point of water. When you are at this phase transition, two or more states of matter usually coexist in equilibrium. So if you hold the temperature at 0 degrees Celsius, ice and water will be at equilibrium. And similarly, at 100 degrees Celsius, under normal atmospheric conditions, water and steam will be in equilibrium. Water, as you keep heating, as you keep supplying heat at 100 degrees Celsius, a phase transition happens and the water converts into steam. Okay, so you keep heating it, water converts into steam, and beyond 100 degrees Celsius, you only have steam. Below 0 degrees Celsius, you only have ice. Okay, and between 0 and 100 degrees Celsius, this is a tricky answer, tricky question. So do we have any water vapor between 0 and 100 degrees Celsius at all? Can somebody tell me the answer?
Yes, sir, we do have, but water and water vapor aren't in an equilibrium.
Absolutely. Otherwise, Earth is, destroyed, right? We won't have any sort of, if we need temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius for any water vapor to be generated, we won't have any clouds and we won't have any rain. The atmosphere will be completely dry. So every liquid is always in equilibrium with its vapor. This is called the vapor pressure of the liquid, right? I'm pretty sure you have heard this term before. But what happens at the point of this phase transition, at the point of boiling point of the liquid is that a large amount of the liquid starts turning into steam. So at that point, basically, the steam state of matter, the steam state of water is more favorable at and above that point. Therefore, water cannot exist. Now, this notion of favorability is something that we hear a lot in thermodynamics, not so much in other branches of physics. In fact, it is, when you have 2 or 3 options for some phenomenon to take place. For example, if you heat the water to 100 degrees Celsius, what can happen? All the water can still continue to be water. All the water can just convert into steam. These are 2 different options that exist above 100 degrees Celsius. Why does it become steam? If you ask the question, why does it become steam? The answer to that is it is thermodynamically more stable for that substance to exist in this new phase called steam above this particular temperature. Now, what this term thermodynamic stability, or sorry, favorability, what does it really mean is something that we cannot answer concretely until we do what is called the second law of thermodynamics. Okay, so all this is governed by the second law of thermodynamics. What is more favorable? For example, think about this question. You have all heard in modern physics, or in your school days itself, that if you excite an atom, it decays. Why does it decay? The answer is not so much coming from quantum mechanics, but it's actually there from thermodynamics. The answer is again the second law. It's the second law of thermodynamics which makes atoms decay, and we'll come to that later. So,
Sir?
Yeah?
Sir, at the temperature of 0 degrees Celsius, you told that the ice and water will coexist. Correct. But what will be the proportions in which they will coexist?
It depends on the amount of heat you supply. That's a good question. We will come to that. That will be the. I'm only looking at phenomena right now. I'm not discussing the mechanism of phase transitions and all these things, but it depends on how much heat you supply. Because to hold the temperature at 0 degrees, at 0 degrees Celsius, you can supply heat, right? If you heat at 0 degrees Celsius, the amount of heat you supply decides how much fraction will be ice and how much will be water. Okay. All right.
Yes.
So
excuse me,
now go on.
Yeah, so like water vapor can exist in the 0 degrees to 100 degrees Celsius range. So similarly, can you have a sort of a coexistence sort of in the sub-zero range of water and solid? But personally,
there is water vapor. There is water vapor even in the sub-zero range, but it's extremely tiny vapor pressure.
Okay.
That is why when you go to cold countries, the humidity is extremely low because there is very little vapor pressure at those temperatures. But see, in an open system, like in a controlled system in the lab, you can control these, but in an open system, there is always coexistence of all 3 states. There is always a thin film of ice above water, right? And all these states coexist.
All right. Okay.
But the fraction, when you say ice, largely it is the fractional amount of ice that you talked about. And when ice dominates over the other 2 phases, you say that it is ice. That's how it is. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
So what is the triple point of water?
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. Triple point is where all three coexist under a particular pressure. This is not at atmospheric pressure. Triple point is where all three states of matter coexist.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
So you said that water will appear above. 1 second.
Sorry, there is some echo.
Hello?
Hello, yes.
So you said that water will appear above like ice, but shouldn't it appear below ice because water is less dense than air,
Yeah,
than
but-
ice?
Yeah, but what I'm not saying water will appear above ice. I'm saying that ice, you will always have a molten layer of water above because ice is solid below. If you put ice on water, ice will float. But if the ground is ice, then water will be above it. That's what I meant.
So why shouldn't the water be preferred where there is like more water, like when there is more pressure?
Yes, we'll come to that. When we discuss the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, we will discuss that.
Okay.
We'll come to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Sir.
Now, I have not really mentioned anything about the anomalous behavior of water. Those are all topics for later. Right now, I'm only discussing what happens to materials when you heat them. Things expand. One thing is they expand. The second thing is they also change phases of matter. Okay, this is all we are talking about right now. Now, the next question that we want to,
So the relation between the alpha, beta, and gamma is only valid for cubical volume.
It's not only for cubical volume, but you should remember that alpha, beta, and gamma are defined as the relative fractional changes, right? So this is not valid only for a cubical volume. This is a general result. If I were to say this is the absolute change, then that will obviously not be equal, but the relative changes will be.
So sir, like
again, I have to qualify. Again, this is true only for a particular class of materials called isotropic materials. There may be materials which have different properties in different directions, in which case these expansions will not be simple numbers. So only for isotropic materials which have the same properties in all directions,
yes,
will this relation, simple relation, hold. Does that clarify?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we are dealing only with isotropic materials. That's the underlying. So any good property that you can think of for materials, please assume that in this course. This is such a simple basic level course that we don't go into any funny properties of materials. We want to keep all of them very simple and understand the physics. Now, let us go into the next topic, which is mechanisms of heating. We just talked about, it's not healing, it's heating. So we talked about what happens to substances commonly when you heat them. I left out one deliberate consequence. I talked about a physical change of phases of matter. This is called a physical change. Why? Because the constituent substance, the chemical composition of that substance is not changing. Even that can change with temperature. For example, if you heat a substance above a certain temperature, you could even break the molecules. And at that point, you can no longer say that it is the same substance as before. When you say a substance, you are usually identifying the substance based on its chemical composition. Okay? And I urge all of you to do this very, very simple experiment. take a sugar solution and try, you do all this. I mean, in the south we call it pakam, and in the north I think you call it chashni. So make chashni and vary the degree of cooling of this sugar syrup. The rate at which you cool decides what phase, crystal phase, or what phase of matter this sugar solution goes into. It's a very, very interesting exercise that you can do in your kitchen. Of course, if your mothers allow you to do that and don't destroy vessels in the process, but this is something that you can see, and it's a very fascinating experiment. You can actually observe how many different phases of crystalline phases exist for sugar. Okay, so it's quite, these are all physical changes. The underlying constitution of sugar itself is not changing. It's only the crystal phase that. So depending on the rate of cooling, a certain crystal phase is more favored. And all these things, notions, become clearer after you study the second law of thermodynamics. So anywhere, if somebody is giving you a reason, this is more favorable than that, somewhere he's bringing in the second law of thermodynamics into action. Okay, so that is to be kept in mind, and we'll discuss second law extensively later. Okay, now we talked about heating substances and what changes happen to them. What are the various mechanisms of heating? Okay, the three main mechanisms of heating are conduction, convection, and radiation. Okay, now what is conduction? If you have two objects A and B and you bring them physically in contact through some object C, then if this is a TA and this is a TB and TA is greater than TB, let us say, then there will be a flow of energy from this to this. And we already saw this. For example, if you drop into a can of water, if you drop a glowing hot piece of metal, right? This is going to lose heat, meaning it's going to lose energy to the water. So in the same way, if you can bring two objects into contact through a material medium in between, then a very dominant process in which this communicates its energy to the other is by this mechanism of conduction. Now, conduction can happen due to various reasons. The most important reason is every material has atoms arranged in a particular, every solid material at least has atoms arranged in a certain fashion, be it a crystalline form or a polycrystalline material or an amorphous material. There are atoms which are inside this material, and they are experiencing vibrations. And we will see later that the amplitude of these vibrations is a function of temperature. If the temperature is higher, these vibrations are higher. And that is how, so for example, when you bring this substance C in contact with the material A, the vibrational amplitude at this end increases, and that gets communicated. So it's like one side of the atom, one side of this rod, the atoms start vibrating more. They will disturb the adjacent atoms. They will further disturb the adjacent atoms, and so on and so forth. And this vibration will now start propagating from A towards B. And ultimately, the atoms which are in contact with this end of the rod will also start increasingly vibrating. And that reflects as an increase in the temperature of B. And gradually the atoms of A will start losing energy and their vibration will start reducing, and their vibration eventually becomes the same as that of B. That is when thermal equilibrium is achieved. So this is one mechanism of conductive heat transfer. Okay.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, here we are assuming that C is a good conductor of heat.
We are not
That-
assuming anything like that. No, this is true for
So
all
how will it
substances.
how will it pass the heat from A to B?
Through lattice vibrations. Through lattice vibrations, every substance will propagate heat through this mechanism that I just mentioned to varying degrees. It is the degree of how the ease with which it propagates heat across is what makes it either a good conductor or a bad conductor. But the mechanism is there in every substance. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Yes.
But there is another mechanism which I am coming to. This is one common mechanism for all solids. Not just solids, even liquids and gases. This is a very common mechanism. The motion of the constituent atoms carrying the energy from the hot side to the cold side is a very common mechanism. And when this happens in solids, without the actual displacement of the atoms, we call it conduction. Okay. When the same happens in liquids, but accompanied by an actual movement of the atoms which are hot, meaning the atoms in contact with the hot side not only vibrate while sitting there, they also move. Because as they vibrate more, as they move more in that region, their density becomes less. And because of gravity, for example, if you have a chamber, a vessel in which you are heating water, this gets hotter first. Why? Through conduction. The pot is usually metal that conducts heat to the lowest layers of water or at the walls, right? And these densities change, and the water that is not as hot will then displace that water. So there is actually a physical movement of the constituent atoms and molecules. And this process happens in liquids and gases, and that is called convection. When this happens due to these vibrations of lattice atoms, without a physical displacement from end to end, we usually call it conduction. Now, conduction can also happen due to electronic mobility. So it's like how current gets carried due to charge carriers inside a conductor, the charge carriers being electrons. In the same way, energy can also be carried by electrons. So the other mechanism I talked about was the lattice atoms which vibrate. But there are also the lattice atoms are usually not just electrons, right? There are positive charges and negative charges inside an atom. And when you put all of them together, you get a lattice. And usually when you have a solid with a lattice, the electrons are kind of distributed like a sheet around, like a an envelope around all these atoms. You have these electrons, and now these electrons can carry the thermal energy by themselves. That is the second mechanism. Now both these mechanisms are possible ways in which conduction happens. The first mechanism is common to all solid substances as well as liquids and gases. But that second phenomenon due to electrons is present only in certain solids, especially metallic solids. Okay. So metallic solids have both these mechanisms operating simultaneously. So conduction can happen due to lattice vibrations or due to electronic mobility, right? So both these will carry the heat from one end to the other, and therefore you have a greater conductivity in the case of metals. Whereas in other materials, only one or the other is more prevalent. Usually it is the lattice vibrations which are more prevalent, and that is what causes the conductivity. So insulators and others, typically, largely you will find that good thermal conductors are also good electrical conductors. So metals are both good thermal and electrical conductors. Now here I want to tell you a very surprising fact that the best known thermal conductor, can somebody tell me what is the best known thermal conductor?
Silver.
Silver.
Okay, that is among metals. Do you know that diamond is an amazing thermal conductor? Diamond is a perfect electrical insulator, perfect as in it's near perfect. It is as good an electrical insulator as it can be, but it has orders of magnitude higher thermal conductivity than most materials. You can check it out. It is now it's a very surprising thing, and it's not easy to explain why diamond, being such a good electrical insulator, is such a good thermal conductor. It has to do with its lattice structure and various other properties, but it should be kept in mind that there are exceptions like that. But usually thermal conductivity and electrical conductivity go hand in hand. Now, I'll ask you another question. We know that at least all of you have heard of this term called a superconductor, which is a perfect electrical conductor with zero resistance. So you would think naively that superconductors are also excellent thermal conductors, but it is the opposite. Superconductors are very bad thermal conductors. So you should always keep these exceptional situations in mind. So that is why largely it is true that thermal conductors and electrical conductors are one and the same in many materials. The same material is acting as a good thermal conductor and a good electrical conductor. But there are a large class of materials where this sort of coexistence of two phenomena is not valid. Okay, so this is important for you to keep in mind. Now
Excuse me, sir.
yeah.
In addition to like these two modes of conduction, can't you have like another one? Like, so I was thinking like instead of like lattice vibrations, suppose you have a magnet and like, you know, some alignment is traveling, like A and B are aligned, and then A gets disaligned, B and C get aligned, then B gets disaligned, C and D get aligned.
Yeah, that is a kind of lattice vibration only. But what you're talking about is, this is not a lattice vibration of the atoms or molecules, but for example, you have spins.
Yes.
Right? You have magnetic domains. So the atoms themselves may not be moving, but the arrangement of spins is changing. That is also a sort of lattice vibration, but it is in the spin domain. That is a very good example that you gave me, and it is true, but I would classify it under lattice vibrations for the time being. We'll look at spin systems later. They are more complicated. We'll actually look at some more advanced stuff regarding temperature. The definition of temperature itself, the way we have defined it, causes a lot of confusion when you go to spin systems. Okay, now yeah, so that was about conduction and convection. Radiation, we are all familiar with radiation. And Let me just write down the equation for conduction. So usually the rate of heat transfer. So if you consider heat as a form of energy, the rate at which the energy is getting transferred from this object to this object is proportional to a few factors. One, it's proportional to the, let us call it P. It's a power, right? Rate of energy transfer is always the units of power. So this power is proportional to the area of cross section of that solid. That makes sense because if each of these, if you put more and more solids between two substances, each of these will carry heat to the other. So one solid can be thought of as, as the area of that solid increases, the heat transfer will also increase. So this power is proportional to the area. And it is also proportional to the gradient of the temperature. So if the temperature gradient is high, that is, if this TA is much greater than TB, then the heat transfer will happen rapidly. And as the temperatures come closer and closer, it has to slow down, right? Ultimately, it has to stop when the temperatures become equal, when the gradient is 0. So if this direction is X, then the gradient is basically the first derivative with respect to distance, right? So it is dt by dx. So dt by dx it's proportional to dt by dx. Okay. So usually this proportionality constant is what we call kappa. In many modern textbooks, it's written as K, but the traditional symbol for this is kappa A and dt by dx. I wrote a modulus because the sign of this depends on the direction of the gradient. You have heat transfer. I'm only interested in the magnitude of the heat transfer. So you can either have heat transfer from this direction to this direction if the gradient is in this direction. You can have heat transfer if in this direction if the gradient is in this direction. So it always follows the direction of the gradient. The magnitude of it is of course given by this expression. Okay. Now we will discuss radiation in the next class. So the next class, okay, some small announcement. We will not have tutorials on this Friday because this Friday happens to be the first day of the lab. So they have organized an orientation or something for the UP 201 lab at 2 PM on Friday. So we won't have the tutorial. And last week we did not have the class on Wednesday. We had a class on Monday. So we will have a class this Friday at 9:30. Okay. It won't be office hours. This week we will actually have a lecture on Friday at 9:30 in the morning, 9:30 to 10:30, and we will continue with radiation, then go into gas laws and finish up this portion. And from Monday onwards, we can start with the first and second laws of thermodynamics. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
So I had a quick question.
Yes.
Regarding the phase transitions.
Yeah.
So how to make sense of vapor pressure of a solid?
So vapor pressure of a solid. So for example, if you take dry ice, right? Dry ice is sublimating. Some solids sublimate like iodine and carbon dioxide in their solid form, they sublimate. In such a situation, you have a vapor coexisting with solid. And then you can talk of vapor pressure of a solid. But in general, for most substances, the intermediate phase is a liquid. So you have to talk of vapor pressure of a liquid and not directly of the solid. Because when the solid form is dominant, remember that they always have a vapor pressure, but very small for most solids. But we don't usually refer to that scenario as vapor pressure. Only when the solid has completely transformed into a liquid, we then talk of a vapor pressure for the liquid. But for sublimating solids, you can have vapor pressure for the solid directly without having any need for a liquid interface. Is that clear?
Yes, sir, I understood.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Sir?
Yeah.
While considering the expansion of the wire, with only the difference in the temperature in account, but here we are considering the gradient of temperature. So what is?
Oh, that's a very good question. In that context, we actually assumed that the entire wire is at the same temperature. So if you remember, the way I introduced it is, I'm holding the wire in my hand and I have, say, a temperature of Ti. I place the wire on the object of which I want to measure the temperature, and then the wire will now come into equilibrium with that temperature and it will get a new length. So the entire wire is at that temperature in that context.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? You should ask questions. I'm very happy people are asking questions because that is the only way we can discuss and yeah. Any other questions? All right. If there are no other questions, let us meet on Friday morning and we'll have a class at 9:30.
Okay, so on Friday we only have a class, huh? No.
Yes, we won't have a tutorial this week. We'll start tutorials from next week. Yeah, this is just the first week of classes, so we'll have enough material for tutorials from next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.